and I'm director of the Albers Placement Center, which is the career center here in the business school. So I want to welcome everybody today to our Courageous Career Conversations webinar. It gives me great joy, students and colleagues from across campus, to welcome you here today. Courageous Career Conversations started last year in partnership with the Maine Career Engagement Office. We had a student come to us about wanting to learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in the workplace. So that's kind of where this thought came about for our Courageous Career Conversations. So today we're in for a treat. The topic of our conversation is finding the path that is right for you. And we are honored today to have James Thomas from Alaska Airlines to join us today as our speaker. I know James will share a bit with you about his story, a little bit about his professional background around his role with DEI initiatives. And then students, we will open it up for questions. So just some general housekeeping for those of you, and not just students, colleagues too across campus. For those of you that feel comfortable having your cameras on, if you wish, we'd love to see you if you feel comfortable with that. Questions, of course, can be posted in the chat. And we are honored to have two of our Alfie scholars here today, Bokyung and Leah, who will be helping us and co-sponsoring our Courageous Career Conversation webinars. They will be monitoring and also keeping the Q&A going for us. So we're lucky to have both of them. And before we get started, I also want to thank Carol Wally and my career engagement colleagues that are on this webinar today. This is such a really fun partnership, I know for me personally and for the center. So just a joy to work with you and also to have our Alfie scholars today. So let's start off our Courageous Career Conversation and have that we've asked Bokyung Kim, who's one of our Alfie scholars, to start us off with a land acknowledgement. Turn it over to you, Bokyung.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Bokyung from the Alfie Scholars Program, and Leah and I are very excited to be co-hosting this event with these amazing people. So today I have the pleasure to read out the land acknowledgement for this event, and here we go. As we begin our gathering for Courageous Career Conversations, we respectfully acknowledge that our event today is taking place on occupied Coast Salish land, and that Seattle University is on the homelands of the Duwamish people. To acknowledge this land is to recognize the history of physical and cultural genocide and settler colonialism, which continues to displace Indigenous people today. It is to also recognize these lands, waters, and their significance for the resilient and wise peoples who continue to thrive in this region despite the consequences of displacement and broken treaties. Let us take a moment to pause and pay our respects to Coast Salish elders, past and present, and extend that respect to their descendants and to all Indigenous people. Now, let me invite Leah to introduce our featured guest for the event.
Hello, everyone. I have the greatest pleasure of introducing our guest speaker, James Thomas. He has a bachelor's in business administration from the University of Phoenix, a master's in legal studies from Arizona State University, and two certificates on diversity management from Cornell University. He is the current Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director for Alaska Airlines, and he has 20 plus years of experience in the field across industries and across the United States. So James, take it away.
Awesome, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you, Carol and Mary Lou, for inviting me. I know it was hard to set a date and kind of lock in on it, but I really appreciate it. And this is actually the part of my job, or one of the parts of my job that I actually really enjoy is having an opportunity to talk to people and share a little bit about how I got into the space, but then also, I feel like DEI is such a hot topic right now that goes in so many different directions. And so it's really great to be able to talk about the work that I've done in the past, but also the work that we're doing here at Alaska. I'll tell you a little bit about my story. Because as I like to say, this was never what I was supposed to do or what I thought I was going to do. If you had asked me, back when I first started school, I started school as a biology major, and I wanted to be a dentist actually. And then, one day I woke up and I thought, gosh, I don't know if I want to look in people's mouths all day. That just doesn't sound very, very fun and intriguing to me. And, I started actually at Nordstrom while I was in college and back in Baltimore, Maryland. And it was never really supposed to be my real job. I just thought at the time, you know what, I'll work a little bit. I'll kind of put myself through college. And this was, I don't want to date myself, but this was actually back when you could work and put yourself through college. I don't know that that's really possible now, that you could just kind of work a job and, pay your tuition. But I thought, well, I want to do something fun. And I actually knew nothing about Nordstrom when I started. And it just became one of these things where I really loved working for them. I started in the restaurant, in the cafe, bussing tables, if you can believe it. And that was my very first job. And then, it just became this place that I really loved. And I really felt like people saw me and valued me and appreciated me. And there was lots of opportunity for me to grow. And I continued to grow into some different roles until I eventually got a chance to get into my first management position. And so as I talk about kind of finding the path that's right for you, this path kind of took me to a lot of different cities, a lot of different roles, and looked very different than what I think I initially thought it was going to look like. And so I moved from Baltimore, Maryland to Philadelphia Pennsylvania, in my first management role. And I ended up doing a couple of different positions there. I stayed there for a total of about 2 years. And then I moved from Philadelphia to Dallas, Texas, with our bank division. And I was in that role for about 2 years. And it was at that time that I really got into the D&I space, the DEI space. And this is really before I think before DEI was really a thing, before it was cool or popular. And I had a leader at the time that approached me, and he said to me, I think you'd be really good for this DEI position that was open in the organization. And honestly, I had no clue what DEI was. And my first question to him was, well, what do they do? And so he actually told me, I think it'd be great for you to contact the person who was responsible for it. And I got a chance to go and visit and watch one of the individuals that worked in the department do some training and shadow them for a little bit. And it was one of those things where I really felt I found this passion for it because it spoke to me as an individual, as a Black male, as a person who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, as someone who has felt marginalization myself. It felt like something I could do that was more than just a job. And so I got into diversity, and I supported our South region, which was at the time Texas, Georgia, and Florida. And kind of halfway through that job, I moved from Dallas, Texas to Atlanta. So you're keeping track. So I went from Baltimore to Philadelphia to Dallas to Atlanta. And so I moved to Atlanta because I was kind of in between Texas and Georgia. And my role in that job was really kind of training all of our employees and managers at the time in diversity, sexual harassment prevention. But I worked also really closely with the leaders in that region to help ensure that we had representation in our employee population as well as in our management population. And also I worked hand in hand with our HR business partners whenever there were issues around discrimination, whether that was from other employees or whether that was from customers. And then, I was kind of cruising. I was doing something I loved. I was feeling good. And my chief HR officer one day said, well, what do you want to do ultimately? And I said, well, I want to lead the division. I want to lead diversity and inclusion for the company. And she said, okay, well, you need to go do something else. You can't stay in this job. And at the time, I just didn't understand. I said, well, why do I have to go do something else? Why can't I just stay in this job and work my way up and continue to do that? And she talked to me about the value of having different experiences and varied experiences. And she said something to me that, has stuck with me probably since she told me. And what she said to me was, she said, James, she said, some of the most successful people don't necessarily have the most experience, they have the most experiences. And that just really stuck with me, because she really talked to me about the value of having diversity of experience and background, and really how that really helps make you a more well-rounded leader. And she really gave me a couple of options. She said, you can either go do something else. She said, or you can stay here in this job, but I will never hire you for the role leading DEI at the company. She's like, so it's your choice. And, with that came a whole lot of fear and anxiety, because I was like, well, she wanted me to go on the business side of it, because she said, if you're going to lead a division, you need to understand all parts of the business, and you specifically need to understand how the business works. But mind you, I had always, up until this point, I had worked on the support side of the business. I had never worked on the selling side. And I was probably having a little bit of a panic attack, thinking, I've never worked on the selling side. I've never taught people how to, sell or manage the business. How in the world am I going to go on that side of it and have credibility? But she basically kicked me out of the nest. And so I took on an interim store manager role. So if any of you are familiar with Nordstrom, if you've shopped at the rack stores before, if you've shopped at the full line stores, you're very familiar. The rack is where you get the treasure hunt, and it's where you get all of the deals and things. And so I moved from Atlanta down to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to do an interim role. We had one of our store managers that was on maternity leave. And so for 3 months, I moved down and managed this rack store in Florida. And then she decided not to come back, and I had built some great relationships. So they asked me to stay. And so I managed the Sawgrass Mills store in Sunrise, Florida for a little over a year. And I did well at that. And then I got an opportunity to lead one of our full line stores in Portland, Oregon. So I moved from Florida all the way to Portland, Oregon. And mind you, I'd never lived in the Pacific Northwest. I had never visited Portland until I stepped off a plane to find a place to live. And I came during the summertime. So I thought, man, this is great. The weather's good. It's sunny. There's no humidity. There's no bugs. And I thought, I can do this. Well, meanwhile, probably 4 months later, it all shifted. And I immediately thought, man, what did I do? Because of course it turned gray, it was raining, and I would play these games with myself where I'd go to the window and I go, oh, I wonder what the weather's like today. And I'd open the curtain and go, oh, surprise, it's gray, it's rain, it's overcast. And I managed the Lloyd Center store there. Yeah, classic P&W summer trap. That's how they get you. And so I moved, I managed that store in Portland for about a year and a half. And then the opportunity became available to come to Seattle to lead the division and lead the DEI function. And I quickly called my leader, the HR leader, and I said, okay, you promised me that if I went out and I did this stuff and I got this varied experience and I went out into the business, that I would have an opportunity to apply for this job and you would seriously consider me. And so I did, and I ended up getting the role, and I spent the next 5 years leading the function for Nordstrom. So that included all of the rack stores, full line stores, distribution centers in Canada, the US, and Puerto Rico. And, thinking back, it was the best decision that I could have ever made and that she could have ever forced me to do, to get out, because what it did for me is it provided me a perspective that I never would have been able to get had I not gone and do that. And it's actually one of the things that I believe has made me the practitioner that I am today, because it really taught me how to look at DEI, not just from being a DEI practitioner, but really holistically, like looking at the business and looking at how does it impact the business, and then making sure that I'm tailoring my conversation to the audience and people that I'm speaking to so that I can move this work forward. So there were a lot of times I would be in meetings and I would have leaders in Seattle that would have these very audacious, things that they wanted to do. And I would have to, raise my hand and say, that sounds really good in theory, but in practical application, that's just never going to work. And I would not have been able to do that had I not had that experience on the business side and been able to kind of bring that to how I did DEI work. Fast forward to, after I left Nordstrom, I went to Starbucks and I spent a little bit of time back on the business side. I was a district manager supporting a portfolio of stores, but then I came back to the D&I space at Starbucks and I supported the US business. So all of the company operated stores in the US, I worked to really help kind of implement and bring our DEI initiatives to life. And again, having that business side of it and really understanding how the business worked, and even previously for Nordstrom, really helped me think about how do I make this consumable for business leaders and for people that are in stores, still communicating a message of diversity and equity and inclusion, but tying it to business outcomes and not just kind of passionate work. And what I talk to people a lot about is, this work, it has a tendency to kind of live in this ethereal place in the clouds. It's like, it's passionate. People they feel strongly about it, and it's personal for people. But you have to kind of bring it down from being this thing that lives up here and bring it down to make it consumable for people so that people really understand the business case. And they also understand what I call kind of the head and the heart. There's the heart around this work is about people. It's about different people. It's people's lives. The head piece is that we're still doing, and I'm still doing this work in a for-profit organization that needs to make money, and that has accountability to stockholders and communities and different people and employees. And so how do I make this a message that really resonates for them as well? So I did that work for Starbucks for a little bit, and then had an opportunity to come over to St. Michel Wine Estates. And I was their first DEI director and really building that program from the ground up. And so in that role, I went from doing this work in fashion retail to doing it in coffee to now doing it in wine, which was a completely different industry because the wine industry, very heavily regulated. You're talking about a product that only a certain population should be able to access, 21 and over. But I supported all of the wineries in California, Oregon, Eastern and Western Washington, and really helping to build that program from scratch. And then the opportunity came available here at Alaska Airlines. And I've long been a guest of Alaska and flying on Alaska. And so I really always appreciated the experience that I got when I flew on the planes. It was always, I felt as though I was the only person on the plane. And so having an opportunity to do this work for my favorite airline was just one of those opportunities I felt like I couldn't pass up. And so how I would describe the work that I do is, I have a team of individuals here, and we work really as consultants across the business. And so my team and I, we work cross-functionally with a lot of different groups, whether that's marketing, whether that's learning and development, whether that's our products and services, things that we have on our planes, our HR department, legal. And really what my role is and my team's role is we consult. We are that subject matter expert. We really help understand what are those strategies and things that you're doing, and what are those products that you're building. And we really help leaders understand, is it inclusive? Does it feel like something that all communities can be a part of? Should we be thinking differently about it? Whose perspective is missing from the table? And then how do we go out and seek that perspective to really make sure that it's as inclusive as possible, with the goal of, we want to make sure that this is an airline that feels great to everybody. So as I think about what I support, there's really three buckets. There's employees, there's guests, and then there's our community. So anything that touches our employees, I want to make sure that there's not bias in the process, that it's not discriminatory, that it's not adversely impacting different communities. So how we recruit people, how we promote people, succession planning, how we train and educate people, new hire orientation, whatever it is, I'm always looking with this lens of how do I make it inclusive? With our guests, we're an airline. We fly all across the country, and we fly to a few international destinations in North America, Canada, as well as Costa Rica and Mexico. And so how do I help make this an airline where no matter who you are, what you look like, where you come from, what your background is, that this feels like an airline where you belong and you see yourself? And then from the community standpoint, how do I make sure that we're not just an airline that's making money, but how are we trying to be a socially conscious and responsible organization? How are we using our size and our scale to impact some of the issues and things that are happening in different communities? How are we being not only sustainable, but how are we making sure that we're helping to solve and address some of our world's concerns and issues around social justice and equality and equity and inclusion? And so it's a fun job that I get to do. There are peaks and valleys, as I like to say. There are good days and bad days, and there are some days where I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall because I'm trying to convince people why this is important and why it matters. And I'm having conversations with people where I'm like, seriously, are we having this conversation in 2021? I thought we were so far beyond that, and how I would say, kind of how this ties to kind of finding your path is I never saw myself here. This was not supposed to be the path that I was going to take. I mean, I was going to go to school at Fisk University, which is an HBCU in Nashville, Tennessee. I was going to go to Meharry Medical College. I was going to be a dentist. I had it all planned out. And, I would tell people that my life looks very different and I wouldn't change it for the world. And to that end, I would say, all of you are probably in this very pivotal point in your life where you're kind of discovering what interests you, what you want to major in, what you're passionate about. But I like to tell people, don't get locked in. Don't get locked into kind of, one narrow path, because so many times there's so much more that potentially is available to you, but you have to be open to it. If I hadn't have been open to trying something new and getting into the DEI space, I never would have gotten into it. Had I not have been open to stretching myself beyond my level of discomfort, moving to a different city, trying a new job or a new thing that I felt like I knew nothing about, I never would have been able to, I believe, have had the opportunities with the companies that I had, but also to be more of a well-rounded practitioner in doing this work today as a result of that. And so don't get locked in. Don't commit yourself to one path. It's okay to want to do something and have an idea of generally what you want to do, but stay open and push yourself and challenge yourself when you're comfortable to get uncomfortable and to step outside of your comfort zone. I always tell people, you hear a lot of people say, step outside of your box. I think it's actually harder to expand your box. It's easier to step outside of it. It's harder to expand your box. And I would really challenge you all to expand your box rather than just step outside of it and really find the things in your work that you are passionate about. And that can show up in a number of different jobs. For me, I love people. I love interacting with people. I love teaching. I love kind of strategic work. And I get to do all of that in some way in this work. And so if you find things that you're passionate about, it might look very different than what you thought it might look like in that particular career field, but you might still get to do those elements and pieces of work. So I'm excited about continuing to do this work for Alaska. I won't say that we're perfect. We've got a lot of work to do. But I affectionately also like to say that my goal at the end of the day is I want to work myself out of a job. I hope that one day companies don't need roles like mine, don't need people like me to say, hey, we should be doing this. Why aren't we doing that? But the reality is that we do. And as long as we do, I feel like I have a responsibility to pay it forward. I think of this work and what I do like a relay race. If you've ever watched a relay race, doesn't matter what leg of the race you're running, every leg is equally important because the end of the race is really going to be determined by how fast the start out person runs, how the second leg, third leg, and fourth leg. And so I'm just trying to run my leg of the race as best I can, because at some point I'm going to have to hand the baton off to you or someone else. And then when you get the baton, I need you to run the race of your life, because the people who are going to come after you are also going to be really dependent on the race that you run. So hopefully I'm running a good race that's going to set you and your kids and your families up for success in the next leg of the race. And so, I feel like part of doing that is to stay curious and to be open. And so excited to be here with all of you, to have a chance to share a little bit about my journey, and would love to know just what's on your mind and what things you're thinking about, and how I can help add some texture or context to that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have so many questions, but I'll let students first ask the questions, and you feel free to unmute your mic and speak and ask your question. But whoa, either emoji or some way, just celebrate what he just shared with us right now. So thank you.
I see a couple of hands up. So anybody just feel free to jump in there. If you want to come off of mute and just ask a question, just feel free to jump in and ask whatever.
Well, first, thank you so much for the story about your life. It's very motivating, and like as a student too, it's just really great to know that there are many options we can take, and we shouldn't be focusing on only one way of life, because that really doesn't happen that way. Like life doesn't go that way. And it's just like a really good reminder that we just should be like open to trying different things. And also I'm in the business school, so like I will be working in the business field, and it's really good to know that in order to actually consult people in like some kind of like fields such as DEI, you have to know about like what things are, like how things go on actually in like the management side and everything, so that you can actually apply those and make it realistic for those people. So it was very motivating, and it's like personally it's really helpful for me. Like I was deciding my major and like, oh, what should I do, like where do I start? I want to make the best choice for me, but I don't know what the best choice is. And it's just really good to know, like it's just be open, just try different things, just take your time. It's just really nice. So I wanted to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, here's the great thing is that I know it sounds really cliche when people say you've got time, but you really do have time. And don't feel like you've got to like make all the decisions tomorrow. And then you can always change it. Like I said, I had one path and one thought, and it completely changed. And I'm actually really glad I didn't take that path, because, for me, I think of the work that I do now, it's more than just a job for me. It's like, I always think of like when I lay my head on my pillow at night, and if at some point when I'm not here, because that's what happens, and you look back on your life and you think about, what was my contribution to the world? What was my contribution to life? How did I use my platform to do something bigger than myself, or something to help other people? For me, this feels like when I go to sleep at night, I have a really good feeling of like, I'm doing work that changes people's lives, that helps make every day a little bit easier for somebody that maybe didn't feel that way the day before or a week before, and for me, that feels fulfilling. Now, don't get me wrong. I like making money. I like being successful and all those other things. But what gives me true fulfillment and joy in my heart and in my life is also that I feel like I'm doing something that is bigger than me, and that's helping society and people. And that's what I really enjoy about this work. So you've got time. And it may end up looking very differently than what you think it does. And that's actually okay.
That's wonderful.
James, I have a question for you. Hi, I'm Megan Spalding. I work with Mary Lou on Mary Lou's
Hi,
team.
Megan.
Nice to meet you. in career advising a lot with students, as they're seeking organizations, researching organizations, I know for a lot of students, the commitment to DEI and DEI values and what is the company doing to improve things, I know that's important as they're really starting to assess companies. So being on that side of things at a company, what advice would you give students? How do they really seek this out and cut through who's just doing lip service and who's actually doing really good, committed, intentional, authentic work?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Megan. And one of the things that I love to say to people is that when you're looking for a job, it's not just about whether or not you're a fit for the company or organization. It's about, is that company a fit for you? I'll speak personally about myself. I've always tried to align myself with companies and brands that I believe in, that I feel I have a connection to their values. And especially since I've started doing this work, I want to know that you're serious about it. One of the questions that I asked in the interview process when I came to Alaska, and I asked this pretty bluntly, I said, are you serious about doing this? I said, because I'm not interested in being a figurehead person. I said, so if you're serious about doing this, great. I'd love to talk more about how I think I can help you do this. But if you're not serious about it, I'm really not going to be your person. And so, there's so many different ways to research companies. I mean, if you from a DEI perspective, get out there on their website. Sustainability, get out there on their website and don't just look for the things that they say, because I call that, anybody can put words on a piece of paper or say, hey, we're committed to it, we believe in it, it's important. But what have they actually done? How are they giving back in their communities? How have they used their money, their size, their scale, their brand to do good, to change things? How are they supporting legislation that's happening in Congress? Or how are they changing the conversation? And then look at their leadership teams. Ask some of those questions about what does the representation look like? And if you're not seeing those things, then think hard about whether or not that's a place you want to be. And if that's a place that's going to line up with your values and who you are, because that's going to be important. I always say that I want people who come to Alaska, and again, we're not perfect. We're definitely on a journey. We've got some work to do, but I don't want it to just be words on a piece of paper. My hope is that if you come here, and if we say we want you to feel included, we want you to belong, we want you to see and experience this, then I want you to feel that. And if you don't feel that, then that means that we're not living up to our commitment and our end of the bargain. And that means we've got more work to do. But go out there, do your research, look on the internet. There are different surveys and things. If you're within the LGBTQ plus community, within the disability community, there's lots of different surveys like the Disability Equality Index survey that Disability In does, or the HRC's CEI survey. There's lots of information that actually tells you how companies are doing, because they rate companies on these things. What do their rankings look like? What things have they done in the community? If you don't see those things, in a lot of cases, that's going to be problematic, and those are things that you should pay attention to. So,
Michelle has a question.
Yes, thank you. Hello, my name is Michelle, and I first off just wanted to start off by thanking you for sharing your story. I find it highly motivational and inspirational as well, just because I am currently a business student, and I make sure one of the things that attracted me towards my major was the ethics portion of it, was the diversity, equity, inclusion part of it. And I do want to continue to incorporate that with whatever work I choose to do, whether it's like a professional job or whether it's a voluntary thing. So I just want to thank you for sharing your experience and how you came to be in the position that you're in. My question sort of has two parts, if that's okay.
yeah.
I mainly just wanted to ask about sort of your personal philosophy when it comes to like sort of implementing these measures that you were talking about, I was in a space where I think like in this previous year, I had this discussion about when you were doing diversity, equity, inclusion work, something to keep in mind is love as praxis, practice love in theory, because there's so much negativity in the world that it is hard to come by initiatives that focus on truly like positively with a positive attitude, implementing things in our society on an equity and inclusion basis. So I would love to know your thoughts about just, love as praxis and how you incorporate that, especially with your team, into, strategies such as recruiting, sustainability measures, and what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. I always start with this work is about people. It's about humans at the core of what we do. And all of us deserve to feel welcome, to feel valued, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel important. And so that's always my starting point is it's about people, it's about humans. And I want to make sure that people don't lose that piece of it. But I also believe that in order to make sustainable change and systemic change, you have to change process. You have to create process, and you have to change process, and you have to ensure that whatever it is that you're doing or whatever it is that you're building, it lives beyond me, it lives beyond you, it lives beyond the next person so that it's sustainable. And it actually truly can generate systemic change. And so a lot of the work that I do, and that's where I go back to my kind of head and heart piece, is you can't do this work, I believe, if you don't have the heart piece. So that's a requirement. That's like a given. You have to have the heart piece. And now I have to also, teach people about the head piece, which is how do I build in systemic change? And so I do a lot of work around process, strategizing around process and creating process and strategy and change management, and how to make sure that I'm creating something that is consistent. Because when you don't have process, obviously that's when bias creeps in. That's when, inequities creep in, where somebody's doing one thing, somebody's doing another thing. Sometimes it's applied, sometimes it's not applied. And so it's kind of a balance between, how do I make sure that I'm storytelling, and storytelling about how to make people feel it here and make people understand like why it's important, and personalizing it. So, I talk to leaders a lot about, yeah, it's great that and I even gave this example to my CEO. I said, yes, Ben, people love and want to know about you as a CEO and how you're running the business. But as a white male that says this work is important to you, how can you storytell to help people understand why it's personal to you? And helping bring people along in that way. And then again, there's the headpiece of like, how do I now create something that I can create a process that I can always go back to say, hey, there is a process. Is this process being followed consistently? And if it's not, why? And is there bias in that process? And how do we just make sure again that it's something sustainable and that's living beyond you, me, or the next person? But it's the head and the heart piece. It's that combination of the two. This work is a lot about storytelling and bringing people along, but it's also about strategizing as well. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question or not.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much.
It's walking a tightrope, honestly, because too much passion and too much heart without enough kind of strategy and process and business, then people don't buy into what you're doing because they feel like it's just a feel-good initiative. And then too much of the other without the heart and the making people feel it and storytelling then just makes it feel like this kind of robotic function.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We have Jason.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your story, James. I appreciate your time and the opportunity to be here. My explicit question has to do with you discussing getting out of your comfort zone. Primarily, well, on one hand, in the context of just generally, on another hand, in the context of applying it to DEI. And then in both contexts, considering how you get out of your comfort zone, especially as continuation over time as your comfort zone expands and becomes wider. How do you keep pushing the limits to expand that box?
Yeah. You know, I think it starts with, Jason, I try not to get married to anything in terms of like, I try not to get fixed to one way of doing something or thinking about something ever. You know, I think about it like this. So when I was at Nordstrom, I was very early in my DEI journey. And thinking back, I can think of so many times where, you know, people would bring ideas and thoughts forward or suggestions or things that, hey, you know, have we tried this? And I'll use employee resource groups as an example. So when I was at Nordstrom, we didn't have employee resource groups when I was first leading the program and starting there. And people would constantly talk to me about having employee resource groups. But because I had never seen it or done it, Jason, I was kind of adamantly opposed to it. And I don't even think I really had a growth mindset around even being open to trying it or thinking about it because I hadn't experienced it. And looking back on that, I really see how that was limiting because there was so much richness and stuff that I now know around that subject that I just didn't get an opportunity to really experience because I wasn't open. I didn't have a growth mindset. So to answer your question, I try not to get married to anything, and I always try to have a growth mindset, even if it doesn't feel like something that I completely understand or agree with. And that's part of the strength of diversity and having people that think differently around you and maybe don't even think the same way as you do. And really that are able to challenge your thought process and challenge how you're thinking about something. And so I try to do a lot of not just speaking, but also listening and listening to understand and listening to, you know, if I hear something that doesn't immediately resonate for me, instead of kind of shutting it down or saying, you know, well, I don't agree with that. It's like, well, tell me more. Help me more. Help me understand maybe a perspective that I'm not missing. And hopefully through that, at the end of the day, maybe I may not end up agreeing with it. Maybe I may not completely get there, but at least I've been able to move some and get to the middle or understand a little bit more of what that person was saying. And then one of the things I try to do now too is seek out people that I know are gonna that are disruptors, that are going to give me their honest feedback and challenge what it is we're trying to do, and not taking it personal, because, you know, sometimes I think it's easy, and I don't think this is just true about when you're a leader, but just in life in general, it's easy to take things personal and not see it as an opportunity to grow or think differently or expand. And so I try not to take things personal and look at it more of a, okay, that's interesting. Like, okay, let's talk through that. Like, what does that look like? And help me understand. And so that for me is really how I try to keep trying to get uncomfortable and expand my box and push myself to think differently. In this space also, it's a lot of also, how can I benchmark and hear what other people are doing? How can I go out and see what other people are doing that maybe is innovative and are things that I'm not doing, to kind of learn. I think one of the best traits that I've had to continually try to get better at, and I'm certainly not there, is not being threatened by having people around you that know more than you, are smarter than you, have different perspectives, but seeing that as an opportunity to grow yourself and to improve what you're trying to do. So there's a few different things that I've been trying to do, Jason, but those are kind of some of the main things that I'm doing it to try and keep pushing myself and to expand my box and not get complacent, because I don't know what.
So I hear one thing that really stands out is be willing to try.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You have to be open. You know, if you have a fixed mindset and you're not willing to be open to the possibilities, there's so much you're going to potentially miss. I mean, companies, people, like if you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you've always gotten. And so I try to have this mindset of I've got to always be open to thinking and doing it differently. That's the only way we're going to ever continue to grow and get better.
Thank you.
What else?
James, I have a question. Earlier, maybe last month even, Alaska Airlines talked about or made a commitment to be one of the most, let me read it right.
Accessible.
Yes, exactly. And I was recently on an airplane and I started to imagine what it might be for someone, what the airline industry could be, and was very excited about the possibility of Alaska Airlines, and knowing that you were here coming to this talk. And I wanted to know, what are some of the things that you're implementing? Because I was imagining finding my seat, and maybe I couldn't, I don't have sight. How would that happen? Or even just maneuvering with a wheelchair or with a cane, how would that happen? And so what does being the most accessible mean for Alaska Airlines?
Well, here's the thing. I don't know, Carol, completely what it looks like. I think I can tell you some of the work that we're doing, and we really rely a lot on our Access BRG, our Access Business Resource Group, which is our business resource group that really looks at accessibility. And we work with a couple of external groups as well, which we have that kind of help consult us, help us understand, like, whether if you're a person that has low vision or vision disability, or if you are a person that is in a wheelchair, how do we make sure that we're getting you on board, providing an accessible experience for you? And so I just recently hired a resource to my team, actually, who is one of my senior specialists, and he came to Alaska from Disney, and one of his specialties was disability. And so, I know, like, even right now, one of the things that we're working on is we're working with our real estate group to really look at our airports. And so, when you come in, as soon as you come into our ticket counter, and that experience with our CSAs, from an accessibility standpoint, what does that look like? What does it need to look like? What should it look like? And so he's really working with them to try and help us create some standards around what we should be thinking about, and best practices and what we're doing. We have a pretty robust program right now in terms of, like, if you book a ticket, and how does the CSA, who's the customer service agent, know if you need an accommodation, and how do we make sure that we get your wheelchair, and then how do we make sure that we don't damage your wheelchair in the process, and then how do we get you in to make sure that you're comfortable in the seat? All those different things are parts that we look at. I think becoming the most accessible airline is probably the things that are the blind spots that we probably don't even know we need to be thinking about. The things I think about are, what if you're a person that gets on our plane that's blind? You can't read the seatback card. You don't know what it says. If you're a person who's deaf, you can't hear the announcements. So what is that experience like for you? And so I think a lot of it is getting people who have those lived experiences that can really share and help us understand, hey, what are we missing during the booking process? What are we missing? Those are the questions and things that we're beginning to start asking and looking at to understand just how we do that. And not even just necessarily for our guests, but also from an employment standpoint. We want to employ individuals with disabilities also. And so, is this an accessible building? Is it accessible for you as an employee? Like, would you be able to come in and feel like this is a place where you can work and be valued? I think there are some things that we're looking at internally also to say, have we created an environment where we can do that? Because it's one thing to put it out there and say you want to do it, but are you actually walking the talk and doing it? Those are the things that I think we're really starting to dive into to understand what more can we be doing.
Leah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question in terms of kind of piggybacking off of what Carol asked. What does the diversity in the workforce in Alaska Airlines look like now? And what are some of the metrics that you guys are using to diversify your workforce?
Yeah, so earlier this year, we put out our 2025 commitments. And this really kind of started after the events of 2020 and the murder of George Floyd. And I think probably like a lot of other companies and organizations, Alaska was no different. Our employees were hurting, and specifically our Black employees. And they really were challenging us to think about what is it we're going to do to really have a commitment around this. And so from that, we did some listening sessions. And from that was really kind of how our 2025 commitments were born. And so they're really broken up into three areas. So the first is representation. Our frontline population, and those are the employees that are closest to our customers. So those are the people in the airports and things that you see. Right now, our population is 33% BIPOC or people of color. And we've made a commitment by 2025 that we want our leadership. And so that would be our directors and above to mirror what our frontline population looks like. And so we've made a commitment that by 2025, we want at a minimum, our leadership to be representative of 33%, ultimately with the goal of we want to be even more racially and gender diverse and diverse in other dimensions. And so that's the first part of it. The second part of it is, we want to create a culture of inclusion and belonging. And so we use our engagement survey and our inclusion index as a way to do that. So several times a year, we do an engagement survey where we reach out to our employees and we just ask them about the culture and how do they feel and what's going on. And as part of that, we ask them questions around, do you feel included? Do you feel you have opportunity for promotion or growth? And so we made a commitment that we wanted by 2025 to increase our inclusion index score by at minimum of 10 points. And so today we're at 9 points, still with a few years to go. And then the last piece of that is our commitment to being able to create career pathways for 175,000 young people. So public leadership. So how do we use our brand, our size, our voice to weigh in on topics and conversations that are important to our employees, our guests, and our communities? And so how do we create 175,000 career pathways for young people? That's not specifically into Alaska or in the airline industry, but just in general. How do we create access and opportunity? So those are the three things that we've committed to, and we measure those. And so part of my job is, we're looking at things like, diverse interview panels. We're looking at diverse candidate slates. We're looking at all director and above roles have to have final approval by our chief HR officer before being filled, to make sure that we've really been able to consider a diverse mix of candidates in those pool of candidates. And so there's some different metrics and things. We have a DEI dashboard that my team really uses to share transparency and visibility with leaders, to really show them, promotions, to show them turnover, to show them where we're doing well and where we have opportunities. But then from that, how do we come up with strategies to address and mitigate what we're seeing?
Thank you. We have just a few minutes, but I know students would not forgive me if I did not ask, how can students find opportunities at Alaska Airlines? And
Oh my gosh.
we recently actually had Alaska Airlines at our career and internship fair this fall. And I know it was it was a virtual fair and it was solidly booked the entire time that they were here. But most students want to know more opportunities. In fact, even our international students who are a part of this group, Alfie Scholars are transfer students, and we had a good number of transfer students this year, and they're co-sponsoring this event today. And they were like, but what about international students as well? And considering a global diverse workforce as well, they want to know how they can also secure some internships and job opportunities in the future.
Yeah, well, we definitely have internships. And so those are paid internships. I actually will have my first intern this coming summer in DEI, which is the first time we'll have that. But you can go to alaskaair.com under careers, and you can find out all the information about our jobs. We're going to be doing a lot of growth. We have about, in the next few years, our expected growth is around 30 to 40% grow. So we're going to be hiring a lot of people. And Seattle is our home, it's our hub. But we also, our hubs are in Anchorage, Alaska, in San Francisco, LAX. But we've got roles across the country. And we're going to be looking for remarkable people. And so I would encourage you to go out there and see if there are jobs or things that are interesting to you. And even if you just get on in our airports or in some of those roles, you get flight benefits. And so flight benefits is a wonderful, wonderful benefit because you can fly to lots of different places. And so, yeah, go to alaskaair.com and go to careers under that. And you can learn a lot more about the different jobs and opportunities that we have available.
James, I just want to say thank you. I want to close our courageous career conversation today, finding your career path. You know, James, just right before we go off air here, I remember when Carol and I were preparing to meet with you for the first time, and I looked at your LinkedIn profile and I saw in your tagline that you're a strategic servant leader. And I was like, love that. Love that. And after hearing you this last, 40, 45 minutes, I can tell you I saw that. So just want to say thank you for being here with our students. Servant leader is a big word for us in Ignatian spirituality and here at Seattle University. And I saw strategic servant leader and it really resonated for me. So anyhow, on behalf of the Career Engagement Office, the Alberta Placement Center, thank you students. Thank you for being here. Alfie Scholars, you're amazing. Just thank you, James. And
thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.